Thank you very, very much for that, Michael. I wanted to kind of begin on a question, given that we're in the Union, it's a free speech institution, so I wanted to root it kind of in the topic of free speech. You've said, I don't think censorship is the great evil that conservatives make it out to be, which is quite a distinction from what the general conservative thought is. Yeah. And that free speech, quote, has gone mad. Would you mind giving us some context behind these remarks?
Yes, because you're right. I was basically the only one saying this when the right embraced free speech absolutism in 2016 to 2020. Free speech is great, but we have to define what we mean. Free speech absolutism not only is not great, it is not possible, and it is certainly found nowhere in the Anglo tradition or the American tradition.
See, throughout history, the greatest minds have wrestled with one of the most important questions facing any society, and that's what, should we allow people to say? Socrates died defending the right to question everything. John Milton, he declared that the truth is strong enough to win in open combat. John Stuart Mill warned that without free debate, without honest inquiry, true ideas become dead dogma. And Thomas Aquinas, he believed that honest pursuit of truth was a sacred duty because all truth ultimately leads back to God. And so there's also some tension, right? Free speech is a powerful good, yet it's never been absolute. So the same thinkers who defended it also recognize limits against speech, and that destroys the moral order or incites real harm, right? Today, in our hyper-connected world, right, this ancient debate has never been more urgent, really. I mean, in this video, we're diving into what, the great thinkers of the past can teach us about free speech, truth, and the common good in our chaotic age. So let's get into it. Also, this is a very small channel. I would really appreciate the love. So hit that like button and subscribe if you like content like this. If you're into philosophy, let's go.
There's, I think, an illusory debate between free speech on the one hand and censorship on the other. But it totally misses the point. All societies have standards, all societies have norms, all societies have taboos. So really, I think the debate, supposedly over free speech, is not really between free speech and censorship, but between two competing sets of standards. An illustrative example. Before the middle of the 20th century, you could teach the Bible in schools, you could not teach pornography in schools. Today, you can teach pornography in schools, you cannot teach the Bible in schools. Maybe some people prefer the situation today. I think we probably had it right the first time. Regardless, though, certain things are not possible to reconcile. You can see it with the transgender phenomenon, which rose up around the same time. Either we're going to let men into the women's bathroom or we're not. Either women get to have their own bathrooms or they don't. But we have to make decisions and we have to make certain exclusions. And the idea of limits and exclusions really goes back to the origin of free speech in our tradition itself. I think of John Locke in the Letter Concerning Toleration, who says that we need free speech and it's all great, except for those damned atheists who cannot be trusted at all, and you certainly can't let them promote their horrible ideas. And his argument was that they would totally undermine society and they can't be trusted. John Milton in Areopagitica, this is probably the greatest essay ever written, speech ever written on free speech. He says, free speech is great except for those Catholics. Now, I'm glad that we've changed the limits a little bit, otherwise I would not be speaking here today. But the notion of limits, I think, is very important. So in the American free speech tradition, we have a First Amendment, the UK does not. So we take free speech very, very seriously. But we make exclusions, obviously, for fraud, for obscenity, for fighting words, for slander and libel, and so on. Why do we make those exclusions? Are they just arbitrary? Are they holdovers from a more bigoted time? No, it's because those are the kinds of speech that undermine speech. The purpose of speech is to convey the truth. The whole idea of free speech as a political concept is that it will help us to hear out different ideas, arrive at the truth, and this will end up in a social good. If you permit fraud, you've undermined speech. If you permit direct threats, you've undermined speech. Even if you promote obscenity, obscenity appeals to the prurient interest. People aren't always the most rational when they're looking at obscene material, and so on. So the question really then becomes, what are these limits going to be? Certainly, I think we should excuse direct threats and that sort of thing. We saw this in the aftermath of my friend Charlie Kirk's assassination. A lot of people on the right wanted to double and triple down on the free marketplace of ideas. Charlie was very good in the free marketplace of ideas. I thought that was the wrong approach, because Charlie did it better than anyone. He was so gracious, he was so charitable, he was so friendly, and so mainstream. He wanted to have these open conversations in the free marketplace of ideas,
debater.
And he was killed for it. Not only was he killed, huge swaths of the mainstream left excused and justified his killing. We all saw the surveys that came out afterward, but even as Charlie was dying, a Democrat strategist was on MSNBC blaming Charlie for his own death, saying this is what happens when you spread hatred. So I'm not calling for some blanket censorship. I'm not saying we shouldn't air out important ideas. But for the people who would celebrate the murder of Charlie Kirk, those people should be excluded from society. Their participation does not advance the very purpose of the free marketplace of ideas, because that is not an end to itself, but an instrument. The instrument is at arriving the truth and at the truth and having a thriving society. They're interested in neither of those things.
If I can quickly just interject. If there is this idea of you're exchanging ideas in the free marketplace, but there are some ideas that are so egregious that they would actually undermine that system of being able to exchange ideas freely, and it's not conducive to the public or the common good that you were mentioning. One, who entirely decides what is conducive to the public good, to the common good? And if it's a society thing, what if someone then turns around and says yours, yourself, are not conducive to the common good?
Many people do.
Many people do, and in fact, you've condemned universities and platforms as fascist when they restrict your events or suspend your accounts. So under what principle is censorship acceptable, when you favor it, but outrageous when it affects you? And if society were to turn around and, entirely say, in some hypothetical world that they see your views as not conducive to the public, to the common good anymore, would you then accept that censorship?
Well, it depends on the circumstance, I guess. That's going to be seen as an evasion. But I'm not an ideologue, I'm a conservative. And so I think that politics is the practical art and based on prudential matters. The question always comes up, who decides? And my answer is someone. Someone's going to decide. There will be order. Aristotle's law of non-contradiction remains undefeated. People are going to have to make the decisions. So the question is, who is that? In a self-government, there's a large role for the people in a democracy. There are roles for private, semi-private, public institutions. There's a role for the government, certainly. You mentioned conducive to the public good, which was a phrase used by the Home Office to keep Hassan Piker out of the country, along with Cenk Uygur, who I would have let in. I have a moderate affection for Cenk Uygur. I don't have an affection for Hassan Piker. I think he should be exiled to Elba. But Cenk Uygur I kind of like.
They're both insufferable.
Nevertheless.
But does that not worry you? Does that not worry you that there are positions being taken to, as you said, maybe Hassan you think is beyond the pale, but Cenk, for example, you don't think? Is that not concerning?
Hassan's beyond the pale because he's called for the murder of Republican senators, for one. He said America deserves 9/11. He says the streets should run red in capitalist blood. So, I think we need to distinguish here between discussing ideas in the abstract and committing speech acts which are literally illegal, at least in my country, and for which he should be prosecuted. And he did recently receive a federal subpoena, and I hope he goes to jail. But regardless, there's that. Then there is the decision of the Home Office to either permit or exclude a foreigner who has no right to come to the UK anyway, and on what basis. So in the case of Hassan, he claimed that he was being excluded because he's anti-Israel. And that might have played a role in it, I don't know. But that can't be the determining factor, because we know that ardently pro-Israel foreigners were excluded as well. Valentina Gomez, who is an extraordinarily right-wing pro-Israel Zionist in America. She filmed herself eating popcorn watching Israeli bombings of Gaza. We're talking very extreme views. She also was excluded from the UK a couple months ago on the very same issue. And plenty of other, usually right-wingers, in this case it's some left-wingers too, are getting lumped in. So I think the UK has every right to keep people out who are not conducive to the public good. I think that's actually the charge of the government, and I wish we would do it more often in the United States. But how do we determine what is beyond the pale?
And would you accept if it turns around back on you?
Well, I wouldn't like it very much, but it depends on circumstances. Like, for instance, I usually don't call my opponents fascist in that they're usually communists. I don't want to compliment them by elevating them even to a sort of undesirable position. But one time, for instance, I was disinvited from St. Thomas University, and I was disinvited because of my then controversial view that men and women are different and the transgender ideology is not real. Now it's more mainstream, but at the time that was very controversial. And I certainly would object to that disinvitation because I was disinvited from St. Thomas University for holding the view on gender held by St. Thomas. That would seem to be contrary to the nature of the institution. However, if I don't know, the Communist Coalition of Philadelphia decided to rescind my invitation because they don't like my right-wingedness, I wouldn't particularly take issue with that. Now, when it gets to matters that involve the government, say public education, I don't like it that schools exclude books because of silly Supreme Court cases in the middle of the 20th century. I don't like that they prohibit prayer in schools, which for most of our nation's history we had. I don't like that they permit pornography in schools. I don't like any of that. But they are going to make those decisions. Someone's going to decide what's in the library. Someone's going to decide what the children say in homeroom. And so I guess my argument there would be that we ought to amass political power in just ways that are permitted by the Constitution, and then we ought to wield that political power. But we have to enforce standards, because contrary to what the libertarians believe, law is not merely downstream of culture. You know, the law is a teacher. The ancient pagans knew it, St. Paul knew it, and they're all right. You can't neatly separate the politics and the culture in a way that some of the metaphysical theorists of politics, the ideologues, wish you can do. Politics is real practical, and we should not be afraid of wielding the power that the people give us on the happy occasions that they give it to us.
Yes. And so something you've mentioned multiple times is, for example, your critiques of transgenderism and a lot of, the DEI, the affirmative action, etc. A lot of these, and I'm not sure if you like this phraseology, but they fall into the category of what people call culture wars. And I'm not sure if you're friendly. It seems that a lot of the commentary, especially from the right, tends to focus almost too much, in some people's opinion, on these culture wars, when, polling, for example, refers to the fact that the majority of the concerns of American people actually lies in the economy.
Economic,
yes, right. Exactly. Do you think that you are actually explaining or platforming concerns that are genuinely really deep-rooted within American society, or does this play into almost a fear-mongering element that doesn't actually solve the concerns of the majority of the American
works.
population?
It works. The people do care. It works. That's why we do it. It's true that the top issues for people tend to be the economy or immigration, but right up there in the top 3 or 4 are issues that are sometimes coded as common sense, and that's where you get some of those cultural issues. Abortion's not a top issue for people. I wish it were, although given that it's 50-50, maybe it's better that it remains lower down. But some of these issues really mattered. The reason that Republicans swept the whole government in 2024, the reason Trump won the popular vote, is in no small part due to the transgender issue. Not because people were staying up at night lamenting the decline of women's volleyball or whatever. It was because the ideology was so manifestly absurd. The idea that our true selves have nothing to do with our bodies, that men can become women, the idea that we ought to castrate little kids. It was so manifestly absurd that it called into question the Democrats' judgment on all of the other issues. So it was a little heuristic. It was a way in to lambasting the Democrats as a whole.
That's right.
I think also Republicans won on the economy, because the economy was sputtering a bit under Biden. And certainly on migration. That was a big issue, because Biden let in 3 million illegal aliens, and it remained a top concern across party lines. So the culture war issues really matter also because you can't neatly separate the cultural issues from the non-cultural issues. Even taxation in a way is a cultural issue. Regulations can be cultural issues. And so I think the way that conservatives win elections is we appeal to the common sense. And if you look at some of the great left-wing theorists of the 20th century, I think of Antonio Gramsci in particular, Gramsci understood that a revolution cannot be successful if it loses the common sense, if it is seen to be too abstract or too far away in theory. So something like transgenderism is a visceral issue. Whatever people's political views, you really don't want your kids exposed to that. That's going to work a lot more.
Do you not worry that, the consistent talking about and covering of such issues maybe exacerbates the extent to which it is actually an issue, and the reason people feel so strongly about it is perhaps quite cyclical? the reason we talk about it a lot because it's very emotive, and it gets to as you said, it gets to this idea of common sense, and you're tapping into that. But perhaps by covering it so often, making it so existential, and perhaps it isn't, that's when it becomes such a big concern for people, and then detracts from perhaps other concerns that are more.
No, I don't. Well, much like the common good, which only grows when it is shared, I don't think it detracts from those other concerns. I think it directs attention toward the political movement that is more likely to fix all of the other problems too. But I think you're right. We definitely called more attention to the issue. The Democrats started the issue. The left started the fight. We finished the fight, but the left started it, and we made sure that everybody heard about it. When the left said that boys can go into girls' bathrooms, we pointed out that girls were being assaulted in these gender-neutral bathrooms in Virginia, in Georgia, in Wisconsin. We made sure that everybody knew about that. That would have been covered up by the media. I mean, that flipped the Virginia gubernatorial election, specifically because of Daily Wire's reporting on it, actually. So it's true. We shine a big light on it. But I think the result of that is people talk about it less. I mean, we're mentioning it here now in the context of other issues, but it has really waned, at least in America, as a political issue, because we won. The reason it's waned is that the Democrats are running away from that issue as quickly as they can because they know that it's a complete loser for them. So I'm willing.
It's not just that the left can't define what a woman is. I mean, that is a clear example of how they are detached from reality and that their logic doesn't follow whatsoever. But there are many other issues where their logic doesn't follow either, and that's why there was a red wave. That is why. And Michael's right about everything he's talking about right here. Let's dive back in.
I'm willing to call more attention to it in the short run if we can win on the issue in the long run.
And you mentioned again this divide between the left bringing in these issues and then, in your opinion, the right winning them. That there seems to be, especially in a lot of the conversations, at least that I've seen you've had, almost like an existential divide between the left and the right. And I believe in Senate testimony, you said political violence is, quote, not merely a matter of some fringe actors, but reflects an ideological issue at every level of the American left.
Yeah.
So before I ask any questions, do you mind giving any context to that before?
Yeah, well, I was asked to testify after Charlie was assassinated, in part because there was an attack on one of my events, too, by Antifa operatives. So 2 Antifa operatives show up. This was a few years ago now at the University of Pittsburgh. At the time that I was taking the stage, I was walking out onto the stage, we hear an explosion, and they threw an explosive at the building. So they were still outside. They ushered us off the stage. I was not hurt. A female police officer was very seriously hurt, taken out of work for a year, life-changing injuries. Finally, one of the perpetrators went to prison, only for 5 years. He should have gone for much longer. His wife got a slap on the wrist. But these were card-carrying Antifa members, like in black bloc groups, rather. Excuse me.
It is so
that
clear
did not
that
turn
the
up
violence is coming
in
from the
registers
left.
of political violence. And so there was this news report that came out of the Atlantic just last year. They said, even though
He said what?
That did not turn up in registers of political violence. And so
Oh, he's talking about when the reporting came out that there isn't political violence on the left, right-wing violence versus left-wing violence, events like that weren't getting recorded.
There was this news report that came out of the Atlantic just last year. They said, even though political violence is usually driven by the right, now the majority of it, for the first time, is coming from the left. I said, well, that's really interesting. Even the liberal Atlantic has to admit that left-wing violence is driving.
But is that at every level of the American left?
Yes. Well, just to wrap up on the point on how it's long been the left, my incident that I lived through with Antifa members was not counted. The BLM riots that killed dozens of people were not counted as political violence. A trans shooting on a Christian school was not counted as political violence. All of the instances, effectively, of left-wing political violence are not counted. And still, liberal outlets today have to admit that it's a left-wing problem. So at all levels, I would have to say yes. We were just mentioning Hassan Piker. Hassan Piker's a pretty mainstream left-wing figure. He campaigns with Democrat politicians regularly. He's got a relatively big live stream. He has openly called for violence against conservatives. Another live streamer would be Stephen Bonnell, Destiny. He likewise has said Republicans should fear for their lives in public. As I mentioned, while Charlie was dying, a Democrat strategist on cable news said, well, he kind of had it coming, didn't he? You had politicians, you had media figures, you had activists, and what was even more distressing for this point about all levels of society was what we saw on social media from teachers, from people that you work with. These are not the weirdos sitting in their basements.
But the issue is, if you frame half the country as ideologically predisposed to violence, or
more predisposed to violence.
More predisposed to violence. How is that different from the collective demonization you claim to oppose? And then, in addition to that, how can you bring someone around the table and try and convince them? That's kind of what Charlie Kirk tried to do to go into university campuses.
Yeah.
If you alienate or try to predispose something upon a group of people, and on that basis, how could they engage with you in good faith, and how could you engage with them in good faith? If you can't have those conversations, where do we go?
If they want to murder me and are advocating murdering me, I cannot engage with them in a conversation. I probably
do you believe that is at every level of the American
It would be war
left?
at that point.
Yeah, it's not the totality of the left. When I say it's at every level of the left, I mean that it's the fringe weirdos on the internet. It's also people in media. It's also people in elected office. It's also people who are activists. When I'm saying there is a large portion at every level. I'm in no way suggesting that it is all of the American left at all. It's not. I mean, the numbers that came out showed that young left-wingers in particular are 8 times as likely to justify political violence as young right-wingers. It's not 100%. It's still something like 26 to 28% would justify political violence. So no, 3/4 of them I can sit and have a conversation with. But 1 in 4 is a big problem. More than 1 in 4 is a big problem. And so how do we?
It's funny because I actually had a discussion with a friend of mine who was he's a liberal, and I told him that they had arrested somebody who was planning on bombing the UFC event recently, and he literally responded to me and said, "You know what? That would have been sick. That would have been cool." And I'm just, dude, I mean, so right there, even in a conversation with a buddy of mine who I don't talk politics with, as soon as something like that gets brought up, clearly liberal, and he literally was almost celebrating the idea of it happening. That's, proof in my own life right there. Bingo.
Deal with that. And you point out, well, Charlie would go to university campuses and talk with all these people. I say, right, that was a good thing that he did. He really reached out to people. He really did his best. And he was killed for it. And then a huge swath of the left celebrated his death. And I guess my response to that, while some people say, well, that means we need to double and triple down on the free marketplace of ideas. I say, whoa. Before we reopen the marketplace, we probably need to kick a few people out of the marketplace. So this is why, I'm kind of joking about the fact that I kind of like Cenk Uygur and I don't like his nephew, but I'm really not joking in the sense that I don't think Cenk wants to kill us. I think Cenk actually is interested in having conversations. He usually wants to scream the whole time and use a lot of profanity, but he is interested in talking. And Hassan Piker likes talking to himself, but he is called for violence, and I see no reason to entertain him.
But what happens to people, as if you believe that these people they don't want to engage in good faith, or they call for violence? What happens when you leave them without discussion? What happens does that solve the problem?
I think they'll learn their lesson, yeah. Because some of them will not, and some of them will just remain on the fringes of society, and that's fine. Societies have fringes. But some of them will learn their lesson. I think that the toleration of the increasing calls for political violence, especially from the left, has only exacerbated the problem. There's a kind of magical thinking that some of my more libertarian friends engage in, which is they think that when you permit an activity, you get less of it. So you hear this a lot with my stoner friends, where they'll say, well, you know what, if you want people to do fewer drugs, man, you just got to legalize them all. I say, because I took Economics 101, and I seem to recall incentives not working that way, and it's not what happens. So I think that when you subsidize behavior, you get more of it. When you punish behavior, you get less of it. And I'm not a totalitarian. I'm not even particularly authoritarian. I guess I'm an ordinary person by the standards of 1992, and today that makes me like Mussolini. But nevertheless, I just think the people who It's like broken windows policing in New York. It's like the first season of The Crown, to use a British example. It's in the little things that the rot begins. And so when that lady, when your kid's teacher says Charlie Kirk got what he deserved, when the waitress at the restaurant says the same thing, when the nurse at the hospital says the same thing, those people need to be punished. They need to lose their jobs.
But surely then that contradicts your idea that these views are only on the fringe. If you've said they're at every single level of the American left,
yeah, I don't think
and that pushing these ideas to the fringe, they'll remain in the fringe, and societies have fringes and they'll learn their lesson.
No, I'm saying they're not in the fringe today, and they should be. We should push them to the fringe. And either they can learn their lesson and correct themselves, or they can remain on the fringe, but they should be excluded from society. Civilization cannot tolerate these people. A marketplace cannot operate if there are bandits shooting up the marketplace.
Totally agree.
But do you think it's reasonable or even practical to push these people out of society?
Yeah, you can fire them. It's not that hard. I mean, we did it after, we did do it to some smaller degree, at least in Tennessee, after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And it's been gummed up in the courts, and there have been all sorts of appeals over this. But I think we just need to try even harder because we have individual rights, and these are very good and important, and individual liberties are very good and important. But wrongs are not rights, and license is not liberty. And while we, in America especially, have a wonderful tradition of engaging with all sorts of ideas, certain speech acts are poisonous and contrary to the open exchange of ideas. So I cannot send my kid to a school that has a teacher who says that she wants to kill me and my family. I just can't do that. I can't go eat at a restaurant where the server says that he or she wants to kill me and my family. I can't go to a hospital where the nurse says the same thing. And so this is punishing.
The solution can't seem to just simply fire all these people and hope that the problem kind of goes away or push them to the fringe, because that only sows division. That only sows division. I think you push people into echo chambers and the echo chambers grow.
No, I'm not even going to give them their own echo chambers. I don't want to give them any quarter. I don't want to give them any institutions. And again, if the problem were 90%, if the problem were that the entire left wants to murder us all, then I'd say, okay, well, shoot, that's not going to work. The only solution in that case might be, I don't know, surrender or civil war. But it's really not that bad. The situation, it's quite dangerous, but it's not that bad. But if you have 26 to 28% of young leftists justifying political violence, many of them might be persuaded if their teachers and their cultural leaders tell them this is wrong. Some of them are going to be a little more stubborn and they need to face consequences, expulsion or firing. The numbers reduce as you go to millennials, Gen X, and the boomers, in who supports political violence. So you're speaking of anywhere from 7 to, I'm doing the math loosely in my head, but you're talking about anywhere from 7 to 15% of the left is really devoted to this. And you can punish 7% of people when they do very bad things.
All right, okay. I'll ask a couple more questions on Trump just before I open it up to the floor for a head-to-head. You have said divorce should basically be outlawed.
Yeah.
Calling no-fault divorce evil. Yet you enthusiastically support Donald Trump, a twice-divorced man whose policy agenda Pope Francis has repeatedly condemned, including on immigration and the environment.
Yeah.
Why doesn't your moral rigor apply to the politician you back
We're not looking to Trump for morals.
Moral rigor does apply, but politicians are not perfectly morally pure figures.
There you go.
And so in the election of 2016, we had Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. That's not a difficult decision. I mean, she murdered all of those people. No, she didn't actually murder people. There are all sorts of rumors. But, this is a woman who is she does encourage the murder of unborn babies. She does encourage the abolition of marriage, all sorts of nasty economic policies. Plenty of foreign policy that I don't support, actually. A little crossover maybe there between the left and the right. But she was just really awful, and she would have been very, very bad for our country. And President Trump has his personal foibles, and I think divorce is very bad. But that wasn't a very difficult decision to make. And on those issues I just mentioned, he turned out to be the most pro-life president we've ever had. He appointed the justices who got Roe v. Wade overruled. First sitting president to show up to the March for Life. He's been very good on the economy. Obviously, the Strait of Hormuz closure has damaged things a little, but he's been very good on the economy overall. That one's not tough. And then we get to Joe Biden, who has been a corpse now for like 7 years. That one's not tough. And then Kamala Harris, who can't speak an English sentence. So the one smart thing Kamala Harris ever said was, she said, "We do not fall out of coconut trees. Do you think you fell out of a coconut tree? You didn't." And that's actually a deeply Burkean conservative insight, but that's not enough to take her through the White House. So no one's arguing that President Trump hasn't had moral failings. I mean, he's owned up to them himself. In fact, he's demonstrated in a New Yorker kind of way quite a lot of humility. I know that is shocking, but there was once, I think it was on St. Patty's Day, he was asked if he was going to have a beer. And he said, "No, I'm not going to have a beer. I don't drink. Can you imagine if I did? I'd be the worst. So the only good thing you can say about me is I've never had a beer." And that actually does reflect a kind of humility. So I think, look, I love Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill had some personal foibles. I love Cato the Younger. Isn't he wonderful? I mean, he's probably the most conservative statesman ever. He had a little bit of a checkered marital history. If you don't know, don't Google it. That doesn't. I don't think there's any contradiction there.
Actually, I wanted to. You mentioned foreign policy, and it reminded me of something interesting. We were talking about the left and right divide, but it seems quite strange that the left and right have kind of coalesced in their opposition to Israel's assault on Gaza.
Yeah.
Do you see an opportunity in that to maybe bridge the divide between the left and the right? Is there a reason why they're both so, or like quite publicly, vehemently against that foreign policy decision? Where do you think that's coming from? Because it's odd that we'd see someone like Candace Owens and Hassan Piker agree across the aisle.
When it happens in Congress, when the Republicans and the Democrats get together on something, it's going to be the worst piece of legislation ever passed. I don't think so. I think that the horseshoe of the left and the right on the Israel-Gaza issue, I think that could be effective in beating up Israel. I think that, it could be effective for that purpose. Just like the pro sort of Kefia people and the pro-LGBT people who don't have all that much in common, but they can be effective in coming together to either to beat up Israel or American imperialism or what have you. They have a common enemy on one issue or two issues, but it's not a stable coalition in any way. So the Iran issue, it exacerbates Iran, and I guess even within the context of Israel-Gaza, it exacerbates a fissure on the right between those who are more hawkish and those who are more dovish. So it divides the right, and in that way you're going to see some group go a little more over to the left. But everybody wants the war in Gaza to end, and everybody wants the war in Iran to end, including Trump, probably most especially Trump. So over the long term, I don't think you're going to see some new coalition. My friend Megyn Kelly made this point the other day. She said something new is coming out of the stale left-right divide. And I think she's sincere about that. I think she is echoing the views of most Americans who frequently say things like that. We hate this two-party system. We need a new third independent party of common sense, whatever. And unfortunately, she's totally wrong. That will never happen because the left and the right are actually coherent entities. The left and the right have existed as such since the French Revolution, and you can see a division between conservatives and more radical people going back to Pericles and Cimon. This is nothing new.
To loop it back, do you think then, with the strange allegiance, at least on this particular issue, between the likes of Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and Hassan Piker, and I'm not too sure whether Destiny, where he lies on this matter, but do you think that then could reflect a potential change in the degree and intensity of American support for Israel in the future?
I think Destiny supports
I don't
Israel.
think they have anything to do with it. I think the podcasters are following public opinion. I don't think they're.
But do you think the consequences of that might be in the future?
I think support for Israel is collapsing in America on its own, and I think it's a little bit in response to the internet. It's a little bit in response to conspiracy theorizing, which some of the conspiracy theorizing as such is kind of justified in the sense that we were all lied to during COVID by the public health authorities, so we're more prone to entertain conspiracy theories. And conspiracy theories often don't work out very well for the Jews because they're this, ancient tribe that's very, very small in number, and they're kind of a nation within other states. And so, there's this modern nation state that was created 80 years ago that a lot of people don't like. So, I think that was all preceding some of the shift with the podcasters. I really think, I don't mean to cast aspersions on the podcasters, because I think a lot of them are sincere and they believe what they're saying, but my explanation for why the podcasters have turned on Trump's priorities on the Israel, Gaza, Iran stuff, but even on other issues, is just that in media, it's always better to be in opposition. And in new media, it's essential, it's kind of existential to be in opposition, because you no longer even have the cohesion of a network where talent and hosts have to get along, but everybody's fighting everybody else for eyeballs. So I'm not saying they're doing it cynically. Others make that accusation. But I just think that's kind of what's leading it. You just don't get as many views and make as much money when you say, hey, the government's doing pretty good. I wish they'd do better, but it's okay. That's what's leading there.
Low-key kind of a good point, though.
The support for Israel, though, it does just seem to be collapsing. They
Candace
lost
is
the
most
left
definitely a
in
grifter.
America 10, 15 years ago. They've since started to lose moderate, non-liberal Democrats, and they were holding on to the Republicans, but I think their support is underwater even among Republicans. Certainly among young Republicans. The boomer Republicans are kind of the last holdouts for them. I think that will improve once the Gaza war is over. People just really don't like seeing brutal wars on television, among other things. But I don't know that it's ever going to return to where it was for changes in religion and ideology within the United States. And so this really complicates the Iran war, because right now, the U.S. and Israel are allies and our interests are aligned a lot of the time, but sometimes they're not aligned. And I think increasingly you're seeing a divergence of the U.S. and Israeli interest, exemplified by President Trump admittedly screaming at Netanyahu on the phone the other day and using expletives that I won't say in this nice, august institution. And so what you're seeing is that Trump wants a deal. And he wants peace, because we've set back the nuclear program, we've taken out a lot of ballistic missiles, we're good, we check the boxes, we don't need regime change. If I'm the Israeli prime minister, I need regime change, because I'm seeing that the global hegemon, which was my big backer and ally, is collapsing in its public support of me. This is probably my last chance. Iran does represent an existential threat to the state of Israel, so I'm going all the way. I'm going to try to gum up a peace deal as best I can. And so you're going to see that tension there. Even though Trump and Netanyahu are good allies and friends. Trump has a town named after him in Israel. You're seeing that divergence. So probably Israel is going to look for more multipolar support now. But Trump wants out of those conflicts. And so over the long term, I don't think it's going to... So long way of getting back to the top of the question. In the long run, I don't think it's going to affect the left-right coalitions very much at all.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you all very much for joining us in this event. But unfortunately, that does bring us to the end of today's event. Can you all please join me in giving Michael Knowles another very
very much
round of applause.
What an absolute masterclass by Michael Knowles here. I highly suggest going to check out his podcast. He makes an appearance on another YouTube channel called Jubilee, where he debates like 20 liberals. Absolute masterclass. He is a great voice of reason in today's society, and I suggest giving him a follow. If you enjoyed this video, like I said, I only have 40 subscribers. I do this because I love philosophy, I love Christian and conservative values, and I love God. So please consider liking and subscribing. It would make my day. So I'll see you on the next one.